Welcome to the mini course on Understanding the Book Industry Standards for Genres. I'm Evelyn Rainey, publisher of shelteringtree.earth publishing. We are a traditional house specializing in fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and juvenile books, which are inspirational and will positively influence the world. This mini course will help you understand what kind of book you have and where it would best fit in a bookstore. You have no idea how many times I've received query letters which promote their manuscript as if they were ordering a coffee. It's a suspense adventure mystery set in the past, but winds up as a time travel piece and flows into magical realms of a fantasy dimension with LGBTQ romance and supernatural horror and steampunk engines, but solid science infrastructure and Reiki medical skills which help solve the mystery. And it's written for all ages. Children will love it, even though there's a few sex scenes. But children are so mature nowadays, and older people will really get the retro scenes and references in Lost in Space. I have to put a label on this book, and there has to be one spot in the store where it can fit and be found. As the author of this book, you need to know where that spot will be. Make changes in your manuscript if you need to help fit it into that spot. Do some research. Know what you have and know who your audience is going to be. Understand that the book industry has standards each genre must adhere to. BISAC or BISAC is wonderful, and most distributors and bookstores and publishers use the same system to identify and categorize books. Go to www.bisg.org and click on the BISAC tab and look at the complete BISAC subject headings. Take your time to narrow down the choices to something that really sounds like they match your book. Currently, there are over 5,000 specific codes. Your publisher will ask you to choose 2 or 3 codes so that your book can show up in various locations. It will also be ranked by how well it does under those genres. As an author, you should understand what each genre entails and how to spot something that isn't quite what it's supposed to be. Definitions are great boundaries, but there are nuances too, and some genres have shifted and changed over the last 20 years. The first thing you must decide is whether your book is fiction or nonfiction. The second thing you must determine is the age of your audience. You have 3 choices for age: juvenile, young adult, and adult. Juvenile fiction and nonfiction. The age ranges from 0 to 21. These are often referred to as children's books. Style ranges from picture books to full saga-length series. Materials range from total innocence to gritty noir. Publishers and libraries categorize juvenile books by their readability levels, but bookstores do not. Picture books, up to age 7, but there are some middle readers which are also considered picture books and vice versa. Basically, large page, large print, low readability, with the focus of each page being on the illustration. Early reader, up to age 9. Don't confuse this with easy readers, which can be up to age 99. An early reader has up to 20,000 words, larger print, more text than illustrations, but not much more, and readability is 3rd grade or lower. Middle reader books are for children between the ages of 8 and 14. And yes, this does vary from one source to the next. Between 40,000 to 60,000 words, normal size print, which is size 12, a few illustrations, usually maps, diagrams, this sort of thing. The readability ranges from 3rd to 9th grade. There is no graphic sex, no graphic violence, and no graphic horror in middle readers. The focus of most middle readers is gaining independence from parental authority. However, readability is not a genre. Consider the BISAC code for juvenile fiction, business, careers, and occupation. One may write a picture book, an early reader, or a middle reader book in this genre as long as it is fiction. If you write one that is nonfiction, the correct BISAC code, no matter what the readability level, is juvenile nonfiction, careers. Young adult fiction and nonfiction are for readers between the ages of 13 and 25. Word count of 60,000 and up. Readability is from the 6th grade level to adult. For both young adult fiction and nonfiction, the emphasis is not readability, but interest levels. These books must be interesting to the reader, keying in on media, graphics, famous people, real-life consequences, and not necessarily happy endings. In young adult fiction, there can be sex, violence, and horror. The focus of most YA fiction is teen angst. The focus of YA nonfiction is belonging and finding your niche in the adult world. Young adult is considered a separate genre from juvenile. If the audience is younger than 17, the juvenile genre takes top billing, and then the subgenre can be almost anything else. For educational purposes, there is a category, not a genre, but a category, which is of interest to publishers who will pitch the book to academic institutes and libraries. This is the young adult easy reader, or just called the easy reader. It has low readability but high interest. And these books are less than 40,000 words with a few illustrations, and the focus is on helping non-readers become readers. Age of this audience tends to be teenaged to late senior adults. Adult fiction and nonfiction is any and everything not juvenile or young adult. The subgenres determine the book's word count. Adult BISAC codes are extensive. Here are a few examples. Mystery, around 45,000 to 90,000 words. The heart and soul of the story must revolve around solving a mystery. Subgenres tend to help define what kind of mystery it is: historical, cozy, suspense, medical, fantasy, etc. Historical fiction, around 60,000 to 150,000 words. The word count depends on the secondary genre. Historical fiction romance is about 60,000. A historical fiction set in a particularly complicated time, which is of great interest to your audience, could go the distance at 150,000 words. At this point in time, historical novels take place before the end of World War II. There is about a 50-year gap between contemporary fiction and historical fiction. Sort of like what makes an antique used to be 100 years, but is now anything pre-computers. The history presented in these novels must be fact-based and well-researched. Alternate historical fiction falls under speculative fiction. Caution should be taken when historical personalities are rewritten to fit the author's story. Source references should be listed in the back of these books. See the mini course on footnotes and bibliographies and take the quiz to help you understand how to use references in your book. Westerns are a subgenre of historical fiction, although the plot is specifically patterned for Westerns. Metaphysical, visionary fiction, and nonfiction. Any length, but it must be well researched and follow the spiritual or philosophical paths set by known visionary leaders, whether they are historical or contemporary. The difference between metaphysical visionary fiction and fantasy is that metaphysical visionary can point to a spiritual or philosophical path that is real. Think law of attraction, traditional religions, contemporary philosophers, and fantasy can point to a spiritual or philosophical path that is created by the author. The difference between metaphysical visionary fiction and metaphysical visionary nonfiction is fiction tells a story in which the vision is interwoven into the tale. In nonfiction, the vision is revealed, often in step-by-step directions or examples. Whether your metaphysical visionary is fiction or nonfiction, a resource, Turabian or APA, at the back of the book is always beneficial. Ethnic fiction and nonfiction are generally listed as a tertiary genre, with fiction or nonfiction, age of reader, and then the main subject of the book, sociology, travel, poetry, arts and performances, etc., as the secondary genre. The ethnicity of the protagonist or of the audience is such a driving force in the story that without that element, the story would fall apart. African American, Spanish, Asian, Irish, Caribbean, any specific ethnic group will be or can be a subgenre of ethnic fiction or nonfiction. LGBTQ fiction and nonfiction. The sexual orientation of the protagonist is such a driving force in the story that, without that element, the story would fall apart. Lesbian, bisexual, transgender, gay, and questioners fiction tends to have a wider age range for their audience and of their characters. Younger than young adult is acceptable in these books, but not generally younger than middle readers. 10 years ago, there were only two main codes which were identified only as LGBT. LGBT gay fiction and LGBT lesbian fiction. But now there are these romance, especially romance fiction. Romances are generally 65,000 to 80,000 words in length. The following are categories, not genres, But when pitching your book to a romance publisher, be ready to categorize your romance. Flame 1, it can be flames, it can be apples, it can be any other word, but the first level is innocent love. Demonstrative at most by holding hands or hugging or a lips to lips only kiss. Usually, this kiss takes place at the end of the book. Flame 2, marital love. Demonstrative by kissing and alluding to a sexual relationship in the future after a traditional wedding. 3 flames, relationship-based love. Demonstrative between the couple to the point of a sexual relationship as long as a marriage or permanent relationship is part of the storyline. Body parts may be named, but not with vulgarity. Anything over 3 flames will not be accepted by shelteringtree.earth publishing. But just so that you will know, 4 flames is contemporary lust, sexual relationships between multiple partners with body parts being lavishly named, caressed, and enjoyed. Flame 5 is non-traditional sexual situations. The only limitations for this flame seems to be that the relationships must be consensual and between adults, humans or non-humans notwithstanding. And then there is the erotica, which can be flames 3 through 5 without the censor of descriptions of the acts themselves. Speculative fiction is a contemporary term which blends together fantasy and science fiction as subgenres. However, BISAC does not yet blend these two as speculative fiction. The difference between fantasy and science fiction has to do with the energy used. Fantasy has magic, metaphysics, and/or mystical elements. They are right-brained, imaginative, emotionally driven. Science fiction, which can be between 100,000 and 120,000 words, has a strong basis of science. If you took away the science, the story would fall apart. It is left-brained, logical, and linear driven. There is one more example of adult fiction that I would like to point out, since we spent so much time on juvenile and young adult fiction. The difference between coming-of-age adult fiction and young adult fiction is the age of the narrator. Coming of age is usually told by a much older version of the protagonist, reflecting back on his or her youth. There is a difference between the type of plot and the type of genre, even though the labels are the same. For example, a fantasy genre can follow the plot line of a mystery, a romance, a quest, a coming of age, or a metamorphosis story. Many times, authors don't realize this. They confuse the plot and the genre. BISAC deals with the genre, the spot on the bookshelf where the customers can find the book, and it must abide with the industry's expectations of what that book is. The plot will designate where, how long, and what entails the preface, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the denouement of the story itself. The plot must carry the reader along once they've bought the book. Look out for my course on plots coming soon. Let's reveal the two most important decisions about properly coding your book: fiction or nonfiction, then age of the audience. After these two things are clear, you need to choose the most important subject your fiction or nonfiction deals with. The over 5,000 genres on the BISAC code database are organized alphabetically, but you should first start large. What is the most important aspect of your book? If your juvenile fiction takes place in a specific location, look at the BISAC codes for people and places. If the place is Canada, find the code for that. If the book is centered on a specific ethnicity or culture of the Indigenous people of Canada, then you'll have the BISAC code JNF 038120 for juvenile nonfiction, people and places, Canada, Indigenous. If the most important thing about your adult book is that it is poetry, these are your main choices. If the most important thing about your juvenile book is that it is poetry, these are your main choices. If the most important thing about your young adult book is that it is poetry, these are your main choices. But you also have to consider these. So, if your book is for children and tells a story in rhyming poetry of how the printing press was invented, and you are not a woman, she, her, you might choose these two BISAC codes. If your book is for young adults and tells a story in rhyming poetry of how the printing press was invented, and you are a woman, she, her, you might choose these two BISAC codes. Choose where your book would best compete with the other books that are similar. What sets it apart? What can give it an edge? Do a book search on Amazon with the BISAC code you just chose. What is available under these categories? Now see how the field is narrowed by the second category. So the first thing to decide is whether your book is fiction or nonfiction. Then what age your audience is. Then the main subject of your book. Then the secondary and even tertiary subjects covered by your book. Use the Find tool and copy-paste each BISAC code which applies to your final list. Then go to Amazon and copy-paste each code into the book search and compare how many of those books are available. Choose the two codes which place your book in the most advantageous light. Would you rather be one book in 70,000 or one book in 10,000? This has been a mini course on understanding the book industry standards for genres. I'm Evelyn Rainey, publisher of shelteringtree.earth Publishing, and I hope you enjoyed this. Now you should be able to understand what kind of book you have and where it would best fit into a bookstore. If you have any questions, go to our website and click on the contact box.